Welcome back to Humans of Ethereum. In this episode, I speak to one of my favorite Ethereans, Jay Rush. Jay is the organizer of the Ethereum Meetup in Philadelphia. He has been very active in the Ethereum community for a very long time. He played a very pivotal role in the aftermath of the DAO attack in 2016, doing important accounting work, which led directly to his current project called TrueBlocks, which he tells you all about in this episode. He has also been in tech for decades, which gives him a very broad perspective. And we take advantage of that perspective in this episode and talk about techno-utopianism and the original vision for the web and Stewart Brand and hacking society and the whole Earth catalog and a bunch of really fun stuff. I really enjoyed this conversation with Jay, and I hope you enjoy it as well. Without further ado, let's kick off with episode 6 of Humans of Ethereum featuring Jay Rush. Hey TJ, how's it going?
How you doing?
Good.
Thanks for inviting me. It's great.
Thanks for making time to do this. I've said this about other folks like Austin before, but I truly cannot think of a better person to include in this series than you. So thank you for making time to have this conversation. I think you've got a very important story to tell here.
Wow. The only thing I know that I'm qualified is that I'm a human.
Are you sure? We need some replicant human tests. You know, we also interviewed Santiago Siri, who's running this project called Democracy Earth, and one of the things they're trying to do is help us figure out who's human and who's a replicant.
Oh, well, the more you get to know me, the more you know I'm human. So.
This is, yeah, I can vouch for you as a human. Let's kick off with your story, right? So in your own words, just tell us who you are, you're a little bit about your background, kind of what you were doing prior to TrueBlocks and Ethereum, all the things.
Wow. I guess I'm going to take about 6 minutes or 8 or something like that. I'll just go for it. Okay?
I'm going to time you. Let's do it.
Okay. So I'm 11 years old, and there's no computers in the world. Well, there's no computers in my house, certainly. So I want to do baseball statistics. So I get a slide rule, and I'm doing baseball statistics with a slide rule. And my mother says, Jay, go outside and play. And I'm like, no, I want to do numbers. So this is literally, if you need to know anything at all about me, this is what I'm like. I'm extremely attentive to my desire to play with numbers and data and stuff like that. I love it. And the deeper I can get into it, the better. So 11 years old, I'm doing that. 15 years old, I got my first computer and I'm writing code on and literally I put my baseball statistics stuff on my TRS-80, and it had an 8 kilobyte floppy disk. It had no hard drive. So we had to install the software on an 8 kilobyte thing. And then we had to take the floppy out to put our data disk in.
I'm just old enough to remember when computers were like that in the like mid to late 80s.
It was mid 80s. It was early 80s. Yeah. So I couldn't fit more than 5 records for my statistics. So I had to have multiple 8 kilobyte floppy disks to do all my statistics. And then I got another computer that was more amazing. And pretty much every 6 years, I was getting the most amazing computer that you could ever imagine. And I was just so always all about how exciting it was and how cool it was and how all my friends didn't really get it, how this is so exciting and so interesting. And it's going to change the world. And I've been saying it's going to change the world every 6 months for 27 years or something. So then I went to IBM, and I worked for IBM for about 5 years. And we were doing 3D computer graphics actually for about 4 years. This was back when, and again, I'm running around saying how exciting it is and how cool it is and everything, but this was in the early 90s. And then what we used to do is we'd go around to the universities. We were in a research group, so we went around to the universities and we would talk to the professors about their work, and then we would bring those ideas back to IBM's research group. Mm-hmm. And we were visiting some university, I think Cornell or something, and this professor was talking about whatever. And I walked down the hallway, and there was this kid in this room by himself with a screen that had a flower on it. And back then in the early 90s, this was something really cool. So I went in, I said, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's the World Wide Web." And then I go, "What?" And he goes, because I had been using the internet for, 6 years, command line FTP stuff, right?
Gopher and stuff, but not the web.
All the, IRC chat and all
BBS. Also just old enough to remember those days.
Command line stuff. So I loved command line, but he's showing me this picture of a flower, and he goes, "Yeah, there's like 26 websites already." And I'm like, "What?" I go, "What?" I go, what is a website?" So then I'm running around for like 4 years. The web's the most amazing thing. You got to see this amazing thing, right? So then I quit IBM, and I started a company trying to build a piece of software for web. But this was in the early, the early mid 90s. And I built a piece of software that back then there was no tools at all. So we were like I'm always like kind of building tools for myself because I feel like I'm a little bit ahead of the curve as far as the tools aren't even there yet. So we built a bunch of stuff to make a web application, and we've been actually, surprisingly, we've been running that same web application since 1994. So
it's still alive today.
What happened, and this is why I know what it means to capture a user, because we built an application that people integrated into their business processes. So we have a trucking company in Wichita, Kansas, or something like that. We have some microscope laboratory at Stanford University. I don't even know who we have, but people build it into their business thing. So they could change, but why change? Because it works and it's automated and it just constantly works for them. So
I saw this in the healthcare technology startup that I was working on before getting into Ethereum. We saw that the medical staff in the hospitals and clinics we worked at, we're still running Internet Explorer 4, and they have these ancient mainframe computers, nothing's in the cloud. And it sounds absurd to us today, but it's exactly the same thing you're saying. It's kind of like, it's not broken, so why fix it?
Yeah, exactly. And then I kind of got uninterested now because I lost, all through like the mid and early 2000s, it was fun and interesting, the web, but it wasn't like cutting edge, like, oh my God, it's going to change the world kind of thing. So
wow, you got jaded by it, I think, faster than, again, you were ahead of the curve. We're all feeling that now, but maybe not quite as early as you did.
It didn't change the world, because back in 1994, when I saw that first website, it was so exciting because everyone was going to publish their own, their own voice. Everyone was going to have their own voice.
Yeah, these were the days of like GeoCities and that stuff.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And nobody even imagined the case where, because we were all using the same server, somebody was going to be watching over our shoulders of everything we did.
Right.
And in fact, when I first started hearing people were doing that, that was kind of interesting and exciting because we have this amazing ability to watch people and study human beings and stuff like that. But it really turned into something I don't think anybody ever would have signed up for if they knew what was coming.
I think it's really important that you highlight this because I think a lot of folks listening to this may not be as aware of this as we are, / even in my case, again, I'm old enough to remember those days, but it's easy. Like we have short memories, right?
Yeah.
When the web, the consumer internet and the web came out in the 90s, it was very much about decentralization. There was no Facebook, there was no Google. Needless to say, it was, as you were just saying, like people acting as self-sovereign individuals, having their own online identities and voices and things like that, until everything got kind of captured and re-centralized by the Facebooks.
Everybody was so excited about that, and everybody was talking about that back then. And that's what we were building back then. It was really exciting. And we could share, right? So prior to that, we had systems where you had a computer on your desktop and you were using an application and you were taking a diskette across the room to share the data.
Yeah, that was the sneaker net.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it was very exciting. it kind of turned into something that wasn't so exciting anymore or something. Maybe I just got older and I wanted to do something else. So then about 2006, well, by this time I had kind of automated my system. So it was just running and I had some clients and didn't really have too much to do to keep the thing running, and it just kind of worked. So then I always wanted to be a writer, and I thought I was going to write novels. So I went to try to get a degree in writing, which I did in 2006. And I wrote like 2 novels. And what I discovered through that process is I am not a writer of novel. I just cannot write a novel.
This is what I love so much about these conversations, is that I've known you for quite some time and I was totally unaware of this part of your past. So thank you for sharing that.
So 2006, I said, I was still had my business because it was running, and but I had a lot of free time because I didn't have to do much. So I went full-time back for a degree in creative writing. And I started writing novels, and I just discovered about myself that I don't tell stories. I just don't care about story. I care about words and about ideas and stuff like that. And this turns into poetry, actually. So I got really, really, really interested in poetry. And then I was running around all over the place saying, you gotta understand poetry. It's the most exciting thing.
It's gonna change the world.
It will change the world. That's the one thing that absolutely will change the world. So I got really into poetry for a long time, probably about 6 or 7 years. So,
fun fact, I was the editor of our high school poetry magazine. I competed at like state level poetry competitions.
Great. Oh, cool. It's still in there
in New Jersey. Maybe it is.
It's absolutely in there. That's why you and I connect.
Maybe. The poets, yeah.
We don't care about this tech shit. My friend Ed Mazarek, he studied poetry undergraduate.
I did not know that either. Yeah. That's really interesting.
He got a degree in math and poetry. So I told him that the only people we're ever going to hire in our business are math and poetry people. They have to have both.
Maybe we need to rebrand as hashtag Poets of Ethereum. That could work too.
Maybe. So, so I was really into poetry, and then I was teaching writing and stuff like that all the way into like 2014, like around 2012, 2013, I was reading about Bitcoin because it was just another, Bitcoin, is the first time since the internet where I said, this is a really amazing thing.
Yep.
And I wasn't quite running around telling people how exciting it was, but mostly because I thought it was actually a scam at the time. It just didn't seem to make sense to me.
I had a similar reaction when I first learned about it back then.
But I was fascinated by it, and I was reading everything I could find about Bitcoin and everything. And then I just disappeared and heard about Ethereum very late in 2015. And literally from minute one, when I heard about Ethereum, I'm like, this is what I'm doing. And I've been nonstop. I actually I was supposed to start teaching another class in January, but then I didn't because I wanted to work on Ethereum. So that was 2016.
So what was it about Ethereum that was so compelling when you first learned about it?
Well, it was amazing because, I'm 50. I was then probably 54 or something like that, and I'm hearing ideas that I'd never heard before, or I'm hearing ideas that I heard 20 years earlier that everybody was talking about.
Yep.
And these just concepts that are just astonishing. Like we can all work together in a way that we don't have to trust each other. Just almost every concept that you hear is brand new concept that you haven't heard before, which is when you first enter it, which was so exciting. And it harkened back to what we all thought we were building back in the 90s. Sorry for that.
You're a popular guy.
So yeah, it was just about the newness of it. And I love the math part of it. The math part was just fantastic. I just loved that. And then I got into the DAO early. Actually what happened is my son, Nathan Rush, and I were into Internet of Things stuff in late 2015. So we were like playing around with that.
I remember that was a big thing a few years ago.
It was so huge. Yeah, it was really exciting. And then, but every time we turned around in IoT, you'd hear about Ethereum back then, especially Slockit and stuff like that.
Yep. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Slockit was an IoT project. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So, and then the DAO came kind of out of that because they were going to try to fund their project through the DAO.
Yep.
And that's where I met like almost everybody I know back then from there. So, you know, that was just off the charts exciting. You know, they raised $150 million in 30 days. You know, everybody, I think they thought they were going to raise $8 million or $10 million or something.
Yeah, I obviously wasn't around at the time, but what I've heard about it is that it got a bit ahead of itself and probably ahead of, you know, the state that it kind of Ethereum was at, both technologically and maybe socially as well at the time.
I think it was one of the most audacious things that I've ever, it was just like, it'll go down in history. I think it'll go down in history as something really profound.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, this concept of a DAO, I keep coming back to it. I'll ask you in a moment. I'm preluding to the next question here, which is about like what Ethereum means to you, and maybe we could even include that. But like, you know, it's many things. But what I keep coming back to is DAOs. Like that is the thing for me that's so unique about it. And I think that a DAO is as important as, you know, the joint stock corporation was when that was created as an innovation a few hundred years ago. We don't even think about this concept now of corporate personhood. It's just second nature to us. But when you really stop to reflect on what a big innovation that was at the time and what that, you know, emerged out of it, 100%. I think that as the very first example of a DAO, it will go down in history for sure.
Yeah, I think it was amazing. And it has built into it exactly what I find really deeply interesting about the whole blockchain idea, which is that we can work together.
Yep. And
the reason we can work together is because we can remove the need for each of us to trust the people that are involved, because the rules are set so strongly that you can't cheat, presumably.
And also removing the need for a centralized third party, right? Like a company to direct us, because it's in code, basically.
Yeah, and so back when they were building that DAO, before it was released, the code didn't have a controller or an owner or what was called at the time I forget what they called it. There was a committee of about 12 people who could make decisions. I forget what
the curators.
Curators, yeah. So that curator code got put into it like maybe a month or so before it was released, because people were concerned about the fact that they were building a piece of software that could not be controlled. But that was the whole point. That was the whole point of the software, was that it could not be controlled. So, and that's what was so exciting, because we're going to build something that we can't control other than by group control. Yeah, you know, and then because of that hack and all that kind of stuff, people started advising that you have to put in an owner, you have to put in an admin.
Right.
And that kind of destroys the whole point of an uncontrollable piece of software.
Yeah, it removes the A from the DAO. It's no longer autonomous.
Yeah, and it's totally understandable, because you're not going to put $150 million in something you can't control. But it also defeats what I think is the fundamental purpose, or the fundamental really exciting thing about these things.
Yep.
So, you know, and then the other thing that came really clear to me at the time of the DAO was the other part of a piece of software that you can't control is, it's okay that you can't control it if you can see everything that's happening inside of the piece of software. And
and maybe you also need the option to exit. Maybe that combination of those two things, the transparency and the option to exit.
Yeah, that's right. It was perfectly okay for me to join, because I can just get back out exactly what I put in and I'm out.
Yep.
Right. But it was also very much about the transparency as well. And what became really, really obvious as soon as that thing got hacked was there was no transparency at all, because the data was so difficult to get to.
Interesting.
And doing like an accounting, doing like a forensic accounting after it happened was nearly impossible.
So basically, the data is there. In theory, it's a quote unquote open book and anyone can kind of read it if they choose. But what you're saying is what you discovered is that in practice, it's actually very, very difficult to parse that data.
It's very difficult. And it's still difficult because it's still difficult for people to really go and get a full, complete, open idea of what's actually happening unless you go to either a third party like Etherscan or you go to the developers of the piece of software who built the thing.
Yep.
Which to me is a third party as well, because what you want is you want the participants to have direct access into the transparent data.
Right.
And that's kind of what TrueBlocks is. It's like, do everything I can to enable arbitrary people to see as deeply into a smart contract as they want to.
Cool. Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of your project. So maybe why don't you introduce that? So we've already heard a bit of the genesis story, kind of how it happened, but catch us up a little bit to the present. What is TrueBlocks today and who's working on it? And, what are your goals with the project?
Well, Ed Mazarek and I are working on mostly full-time. I'm definitely full-time. He's mostly full-time. It's always been about decentralization, and for me, what that means is running on a laptop. That's just how I define decentralization, is if I'm running on a laptop and I can get data without asking anybody's permission,
yep,
then I'm decentralized. So unfortunately, that means you have to run a node. So I run a node on a laptop, and what we built is it's sort of classified by people, I think, as a blockchain explorer, but it's a little bit different because we do not extract all the data from the chain. All we extract is a list of addresses and where they appear in the chain. Mm-hmm. So now we have a small database. It's actually probably about 20 gigabytes, so it's not that small, but it's...
well, that's more than an order of magnitude less than the full node data.
And then the other thing is, if you extract every piece of data from a full node, it blows up to about 3 or 4 terabytes of data.
Interesting. So it's actually pretty compressed in the format.
Well, the thing that's really important to have true transparency is trace data.
Right.
It's basically all the interactions that happen under the transaction. And that stuff is not stored, it's generated. So right. When you request traces, it reruns the trace and then it can export them. Right. But I don't believe that stuff's stored. Mm-hmm. So that's why it blows up, because if you're going to extract all the traces, they're being generated and then you have to store them somewhere.
Yeah. So I think that's a form of...
We don't do that. What we do is we just get the list of addresses and where they appear in the chain. Right. And now, because we think that most users are really only interested in their own data, if you query for your address, we can tell you exactly which pieces of traces to pull.
Got it.
And that's why it works on a laptop.
So if I want to know everything that's ever touched my Ethereum address or account, I can use TrueBlocks to just trace that history across the entire history of the blockchain.
Yeah, and it's more than just touch, because what happens with the data, and the reason why it's not as transparent as you would think, is because of the fact that your address can be used as data in someone else's smart contract.
Right, which is exactly how things like ERC20 contracts work. I guess many people don't understand that.
Yeah, so for example, a mint event in a ERC20 can happen without you even knowing that you became the owner of a token.
Right, like an airdrop.
Yeah, exactly. So you won't see that if you just search for things that happened to your address, because it didn't really happen to your address. It happened on the ERC20 token.
Right.
It's just recorded as data in the thing. So we find those pieces of information as well.
Right. And if I remember correctly, actually, you and I kind of first met and got to know one another while we were, kind of exploring this problem and discussing potential solutions to it more than a year ago. Yeah.
Open source. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm working on that literally since the day that the hack happened on the DAO, because what happened there was 3 different people did accounting on the DAO's history. and they came up with 3 different results. And I just like, how is that even possible? I cannot understand how it's even possible.
I've had issues with this more recently, even around things like multi-sigs, right? Just again, with the ERC20s and things like that, just trying to understand, we have a Gitcoin grant for the Ethereum cat herders, trying to understand where the tokens are flowing in and reconcile against the official numbers, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely, and it's very difficult, but it was so stunning to me that 18 decimal place accuracy in a immutable record of what happened, and you get 3 different people with 3 different results.
Yeah, there's a delicious irony in there, right? Because the whole point of a blockchain is it's supposed to be like the canonical history, and we're all supposed to come to consensus on that history.
Yeah. So then, and what happened to me, there was this guy called Beltran. I don't know if you know Beltran.
Yeah.
He was called
Lyrical Polymath. Yeah, we're going to do an episode of that. We're doing an episode of that with him as well.
He's the most wonderful person in the world, by the way.
Yeah.
He probably studied poetry, if I wouldn't be mistaken. But
I'll ask him.
he wrote one of these 3 things, and in the comment in one of his things, it said, "This is really great. It only took 19 hours to extract 12 days of data." And I'm like, 19 hours for 12 days? Right? So that's where the quick and QuickBlocks originally came from, because it's like, you got to be able to do better than that.
Got it.
So
tell us about the name, because the name changed, right? You mentioned QuickBlocks just now.
Yeah. So, QuickBlocks was, exactly what it sounds like, which is a ripoff of QuickBooks. So I tried to trademark that, and I trademarked the term "accounting for the revolution."
That's great.
I know, I love that. I trademarked that term and the word QuickBlocks on the same day. So I think their little bot that watches for, attempts to trademark their name lit up, and then they said I couldn't trademark QuickBlocks, but I did get accounting for the revolution. So then I changed it to TrueBlocks, but TrueBlocks actually brings up another issue that I was really concerned with as well, which is one of the things that happens with these blockchain explorers is people extract data, and then they're just delivering the data straight to you without any verification that the data is what it should be.
So you're still trusting a third party in that case?
You're totally trusting a third party. And having come from a place where I know how to capture people, I can see how they could easily capture me if I built a system that's built on top of their APIs or something like that. So to me, something like Etherscan is really bad because it has the potential of turning into something that they can capture us, they can watch us because they know who we are when we come to their site, and they're giving us data that's not verified, which is what's the point of blockchain otherwise? So all of those things were like built into the word TrueBlock. I was trying to build something that I couldn't lie about what the data was.
Got it. And the idea is, again, as you were saying, it's a piece of software that anyone can run on a commodity laptop, basically. Assuming you have to have that.
It's getting harder and harder to do that, but yeah.
You inspired me. I want you to know, a few months ago, I did begin running a full Geth node on my laptop, and I think it's at about 300 gigabytes now.
Yeah.
It's still possible, but you have to have a pretty beefy laptop.
It's getting harder and harder.
Yeah.
But that goes back to the 1990s. I think one of the reasons why the web got captured is because the applications were really pushing on the hardware, and the hardware wasn't able to keep up. So I think
that's a good point.
Danger of that happening as well. But anyway, so so TrueBlocks is fundamentally a way to extract lists of addresses per block, so you can get a history of any address pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It does take up some space, and it takes a while to scrape the chain. But once you have this index, then now what we're starting to do is build applications on top of this index.
Cool.
We put an API in front of the index, so I can query for my address, and I'll get back all the JSON data that represents everything that ever happened on my address.
Cool.
And now I can build any web, I can just build any kind of application on that data.
And I know that you guys have participated in a number of Ethereum hackathons trying to put that tool in front of teams.
it's tough because, it's complicated. It's hard. It doesn't install well and all kinds of stuff.
I mean, that's true of everything in Ethereum today.
Yeah,
We'll get there. So I want to make sure we talk a little bit about another important topic, closely related, obviously, which is funding. I know that you have an important story to tell here as well, so I want to make sure you have a chance to tell that. What does that look like for TrueBlocks and for you and for Ed's work, right? Again, you guys are doing really important work, building a very important piece of software here that I think creates enormous value in this ecosystem. I'd love to hear you tell your story about, the transitioning from kind of closed source to open source project, and what has, in particular, what has worked well and what has not worked so well with regards to funding.
Complicated. Well, nothing has worked as far as funding.
Okay.
Except applying for an Ethereum Foundation grant, which was very well received. So we got a nice grant back in September of 2018, and we're still working on that. But we're still, we still have about a third of that money left. So,
cool.
So I mentioned that I have this piece of software that I've been running for about 25 years that kind of generates it doesn't generate much income anymore, but it generates some income. So for me personally, that kind of funds my life. So I personally don't have a huge burden there. Ed, for me to hire anybody else, then I'm going to have to spend my own money to hire other people. So I've been doing that for about 2 years because I'm just really excited about the whole space. And I'm developing a piece of software that I think eventually, if I'm persistent, I can create something that is really valuable.
Cool.
So the grant that we got is it's devoted to Ed's salary, basically, because Ed takes a bit of a salary. He doesn't take what he's worth or anything like that. And he and I are working out details of how we might share what we're building together as far as the company is concerned.
Yep.
So what happened to me is I started because I wanted to build a product just like I built a product 25 years ago, thinking that I was going to build something that I could just sell to people or something.
Right.
But then this whole issue of like true data and verified data, and why am I not just like a Web 2.0 company if I capture my users? All of that stuff started becoming really obvious to me. And the reason why I asked for a grant from the Ethereum Foundation was because I didn't think that this thing that I was building could be a product. Because if I built something that could be captured, or if I could capture my users, I would never be able to reach the beautiful idea of utterly transparent, no controlling party, piece of software that you cannot control and therefore brings a whole new world of opportunities. All of those things disappeared if I tried to build a piece of software that captured people to me. So that's why I wanted to get a grant. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why I did get a grant, is because that's the kind of things I was saying back then was, I can't make this into a monetizable product.
Interesting. Do you think that there are ways to monetize work like the work that you're doing that don't involve capturing people in that kind of nasty Web 2 way that so many products do?
I hope so. I really, truly do, because otherwise we're not going to be able to build the thing that we think we're going to build. It's just, I think that if the only way to do that is to capture people, people will just say, well, if I'm going to get captured by this old fashioned thing, why am I changing? I'll just stick with the old fashioned stuff.
Going way back, because you and I remember these days, right? There was freeware and shareware and all this kind of stuff. And maybe I'm being overly naive. Maybe we've proven that those models don't work very well, but I'm just wondering, is there not a model here where you kind of ask people to contribute, to software that they're using, and maybe that's a way to avoid capture?
I don't know. I think that takes somebody that's building a community. I don't know that for me personally, that works because I'm not much of a community person, but I don't build communities well, I don't think. But is it possible for other people? I don't know. I think maybe not, because have we shown that that doesn't work or something? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this tragedy of the commons effect that sets in a lot of open source projects today.
That's why I love DAOs, and I love like what Aragon's doing, because they're like a group that's really focused on this, you know, building things that large groups of people can participate in, and trying to be open and stuff like that. And Griff Green, like, you know, Griff Green, I'm sure his work.
Yeah, I'll be doing an episode with Griff as well.
Oh, he's the best, man.
Yeah.
He's so amazing. But his work is just completely like, you know, let's figure that question out. Let's go figure out, what does an organization look like that's truly built on these ideas, you know?
You mean Giveth? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that this particular piece of software that I built called TrueBlocks isn't going to be monetized, but I can envision building applications all over the place on top of a data layer that looks like this,
right,
that is truly decentralized. And I'll build all kinds of applications that I'll sell. You know, I think that's perfectly legitimate. I think what's not legitimate is that the infrastructure itself can't be capturable. Because I think, yeah.
So then this leads to this very interesting question, which is, how do we fund the commons or the infrastructure? And I mean, one way to do that, which is sort of the Bitcoin model, right? Given that Bitcoin doesn't have, you know, there's no concept of kind of public funding in that community. And it's actually not that different in Ethereum. The idea is that those things that are built on top, which are monetized, can then support the underlying platform.
Through donation?
Well, yeah, call it donation if you want. I mean, this is how a lot of open source projects are maintained, right? Is that you have some large corporation, a Google or a Facebook or whatever, a for-profit company that has developers that contribute back to these open source projects.
Yeah.
So that model seems to work in at least some cases.
We've gotten some great pieces of technology out of Facebook and Google, actually.
Sure.
You don't know. I mean, I'm a lowly engineer, really, so those things are difficult for me.
I think the community needs to support amazing engineering work like the work that you and Ed are doing.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. What does Ethereum mean to you? This is kind of an impossible question, but I want to hear your thoughts.
You're right. It doesn't mean anything at all to me. It's nothing.
I know you too well to know that that's you're being sarcastic.
I'm just seeing where you go with that question.
You could take it 100 different directions for sure.
Where are you going to go with that answer? I mean,
well, so my answer, I've thought about this quite a bit, as you can imagine, and I always preface it by saying that it really is many things to many people, and you know, I've had different phases, and even just in the past 18 months or so since I, you know, began my tenure in this community. I've had different phases where I've had different thoughts about this, but where I am right now is I call it an operating system for building better human institutions. And that speaks directly to things like DAOs. Yeah. Right? There's lots of exciting things about Ethereum as a concept and as a technology, but really for me, fundamentally what it's about is aligning incentives and finding ways for humans to kind of coordinate in ways that were not possible before through governments or firms or things like that.
100%, absolutely, exactly what it is, yeah. That's what we were all thinking we were building when we were building the DAO back in the day.
Exactly.
Absolutely, exactly that. And there's 100 different vectors that not attack. It's not the right word to say attack, but if you're not careful about these different ways that it can get corrupted or you know, the engineering isn't done right, so that accidentally you build something that doesn't really work the way you think it works.
Sure.
You end up with something that isn't that. It isn't that, because changing the way humans organize is pretty profoundly difficult, right?
I call these the dystopian Black Mirror outcomes, and I mean, I feel like this is my life's work, right? I jokingly say it's pushing technology like Ethereum forward while trying to avoid these dystopian Black Mirror outcomes. But
Absolutely.
we're at a fork in the road, right? And if we kind of don't nudge ourselves enough in this direction, then we're going to go the dystopian direction.
Oh, I'm telling you, man, this thing can turn into the worst thing that could have happened, because here's what we're actually building. We're building an unbelievably excellent data collection mechanism.
Yep.
Near perfect data that has no ambiguity in it. And it's intimate data. It's really deeply intimate data, because you're buying stuff. You're spending your money on this stuff.
Yep.
So this is really powerful data. And if 6 companies come to be, if we build something that only 6 companies can run the hardware that actually handles this data, we're building something really bad, something bad. So,
yeah, and you lived through this with the first incarnation of the web, and that didn't.
So it's so interesting, because it happens not in a
Right.
I'm going to build an evil machine. It happens like, look how cool it would be if I could do this. Look how cool it would be if I could do this. And they keep pushing, and you accidentally arrive at where you don't want to be.
Yeah, you get this snowball effect that kicks in. And I mean, everyone always likes to pick on Google and say that the company that didn't want to be evil is now evil. Right. And there's this interesting meme that's begun to arise, which is can't be evil. Rather than don't be evil, it's can't be evil. And that's so right. I think this goes back to incentives. We have to structure the incentives in such a way that these things aren't possible in the first place.
And then, but every time you go to a smart contract that has is owner,
yeah,
you're challenging whether or not that thing can ever, that thing can be turned evil.
Yeah.
So, but it's so hard to convince somebody to write a piece of software that holds a chunk of money that doesn't have an owner. It's just like insane to even suggest, almost.
Yeah, it's for at least 2 reasons that just came to my mind. The first is that it's just genuinely scary to put all of our faith into a piece of code that's, we can never completely, fully, formally, thoroughly test something and know that it will perform as expected without any bugs or unexpected glitches. That's number one. And number 2 is I think there is a selfish human drive to put our name and our hands on something and control something. I've certainly felt that pull in various projects that I've been involved in, and it's been really fascinating learning to take a step back. Just so one example, this Humans of Ethereum project meme, right, that you and I are deep into at this particular moment. I don't want to own this, right? I want this to be, I put a hashtag in front of it for a reason. I want it to be something that other people step up and contribute to and make their own and run with and conduct interviews and do whatever they want to do with it. But there's always a part of you that says, no, hold on, I created this,
Yeah. No, when we were in Berlin last summer, and then we were at the Web3 conference.
Yep.
People were talking about something, and I asked a question there, because this is exactly what I'm thinking. Is like, I think sometimes people just have to give a gift to the world and just say, this is a thing, just it's there. I don't want it. I don't want to control it. In other words,
trust that the universe will repay that in one way or another.
It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
But if you really want, like this thing we built, which is an index of data, right? I want to give it away, but I'm also 100% hesitant to give it away, because it does have what might be value to it. But I also think it doesn't work if I don't give it away. So I'm stuck in the middle of trying to figure out how to proceed. But
I remember when you and I met last year, you were struggling with this question, and it was really fascinating to watch that play out and watch that process unfold as you came around to the idea of open source, and it wasn't an easy decision.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I'm glad I did, actually. And I'm committed, because, I'm kind of old enough, and I'm I don't care, kind of. And it's too much energy to try to capture it almost, and just giving it away would be better, but I don't know.
What do you think about community? I know this is another topic that you care a great deal about. Again, it's an open-ended question, but what does community mean, in your work or in this particular project? How do we know who's in the community? How do we listen to the community? Any of those things or other things?
Oh, listen to the community is really hard. Yeah, that's impossible. I love this community. It's amazing. Every person I meet is what's really interesting is, because it's hugely mathematical and it's really complicated, the kind of people that are attracted to the thing are just interesting people to begin with. So almost everybody I've met is just fascinating person,
I have another line, which is something like, I came for the tech and I stayed for the people, but I think that does.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's amazing. Everybody's amazing. And I love going to different conferences and just hanging out with people. Ethereans in Paris was one of my great evenings.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was really great.
Yeah,
so,
hopefully we can do that again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So the people are amazing. I mean, the most amazing people I've met my whole life, easily. And I think it's directly related to the fact about how complicated it is and that it's so mathematical. It's just those kind of people are just curious and interested and want to be challenged. And, they want to find things that they don't understand. And then they're willing to be like me, where I just literally devote every minute of my life to trying to figure it out. So.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience as well. When I first learned about Ethereum in 2017, I just needed to go sit in a dark room. First, I needed to stare at a wall for 30 minutes to just let the pieces sink in and connect. And then I needed to go sit in a dark room and just read white papers for like 2-3 months to just begin to, to get a sense of what all this is and what it means. I mean, I'm still, that process is still playing out for sure.
No, you're one of the great people that I met, because I found out, every time I learn more about you, it's like, oh yeah, I went to Stanford. Oh yeah, I program in bytecode by memory or something. It's like everything. You're crazy. You're like, oh yeah, I know WASM. Oh yeah, I wrote WASM.
I'm wearing the eWASM shirt, so
great.
It wasn't Pride. It was Berkeley, not Stanford, but same geography.
I'm sorry about that. That's better, actually.
What I want to ask, what is the thing that you think the best thing that you've done, or the best decision you've made? And I guess in the context of TrueBlocks or Ethereum, or feel free to just take it and run with it. And what's the biggest mistake you've made?
Biggest mistake is easy, because I allow myself to descend into deep rabbit holes for months on end. And I don't pay attention to like coming out in the world and talking about what I'm doing. So I think I'm pretty good at engineering and writing code and stuff like that, but I'm not great at like letting people know what I do. So my work doesn't get broadly distributed because I'm in the rabbit hole, and I like to be down in that rabbit hole. So that's probably a little bit of a mistake that I make.
So hopefully folks listening to this will help spread the word a little bit about you and the important work you're doing. It's funny because I think I've made the exact opposite mistake. I think I've over embraced Twitter and writing and speaking, and haven't done as much deep sustained work as I would like to have. And so I'm actually kind of trying to move in the opposite direction right now.
Yeah. Well, the grass is always greener on the other.
Of course.
Yeah. I don't know. And then, I mean, almost exactly the same thing as what I've done best, which is just get down into that rabbit hole and just be down in there and kind of commit to the idea of decentralization as sort of the first principle that I'm working on, because to me, it's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I've understood, and I've understood things that people think about, but they didn't really go down there to figure out how to do it. And I think that's why people sometimes find my work a little bit surprising, because it's like, how can you possibly do that on a laptop? And I'm like, well, I just kept doing it until it worked. It's like,
I definitely had that reaction. I remember the first time you pulled out the laptop and you pulled out the external hard drive and you booted it up, and I was like, it's amazing. I can't believe this is running on a laptop.
I know, it's kind of crazy. I'm surprised that it works, actually.
We'll include, do you have some sort of a demo video or piece of software? I mean, I guess the software is open source so people can download it, but we'll include links to all that stuff in the show notes if people want to check out TrueBlocks.
Yep.
What do you think, so that was about you, right? What do you think about Ethereum? What do you think that Ethereum as a project, as a community, as a brand is doing well, and what are we not doing so well? What are our strengths and weaknesses as a community or project?
Now my political hat is churning. I think everything is wonderful.
You're drinking a lot of that Kool-Aid, that patented Ethereum Kool-Aid.
I'll say it this way, okay? It's 22, 26, 24-year-old people that could not have done what they did had they known what a 50-year-old knows, because they just would say that's impossible. And then it's also 24 and 25-year-old people that don't know what a 50-year-old knows. So they have more enthusiasm and less caution than a 50-year-old might have. So it's both of those things. And I don't think it happens without that sort of unbridled enthusiasm. But then what happens is maybe they're building something that might be really bad 25 years from now.
Sure.
So, but how exciting, it's like the most exciting damn thing in the world. So.
Yeah, I always say that my meme for this year is popcorn, you know, just kind of like sitting by the sidelines and watching and thinking, oh boy, this is going to be exciting either way.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And then, you know, but it may be generational too. So maybe it's like, you know, not until 2110 or 2110 that we actually have a DAO that is running a country or something like that. But you know, because maybe it just keeps going back and forth. I actually think it's because the hardware, I think that the ideas that are built into the software are too ambitious for the hardware. And for example, disk space and stuff like that. And then it's easier to centralize stuff, and that's why that happens. But then a generation from now, you have a whole new class of hardware. So back in the 90s, when we were doing the web stuff, we couldn't do cryptography. In fact, we wrote some cryptography code, and it was only 16 bits, and it took 3 days to run. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was just at ZCon 1 a few days ago, and there was a lot of talk there about trying to get, you know, basic cryptography stuff like, you know, the zero knowledge proofs running on things like mobile phones today. It's very, very difficult. It's very expensive. It's very resource intensive. But what makes me optimistic is that all of this sounds exactly like the state of the web or computing, offline computing as well, in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, that's right.
So it will get better exponentially.
Yeah.
What do you think we can or should do to avoid some of those possible dystopian outcomes that you and I are kind of talking about?
Nothing.
Is it hopeless?
It's not hopeless. It's just it's just, you know, write things down like now, write your thoughts down so that when, you know, your children's children read something, they're like, oh my God, these people were there. They almost had it, and explain why it may or may not succeed or something like that, and explain your concerns so that they can have a shorthand to getting to those concerns earlier or something.
I like that.
Because
maybe
look at what happened with that. Look at what happened with that. I mean, not only did I read all the white papers, I read 97 academic articles from 1972, right? Because these people all the same issues were there back then. So that history was so super important in making this happen. So write, I would say write, you know, as best you can. I mean, I write a little bit. I'm not academic, but I just write my thoughts about what we're doing. So.
And maybe read that history too. I do feel like a lot of us have skipped a lot of that.
Yeah, everybody out there, if you're listening, go read what happened to me is I found the Bitcoin white paper. It had 8 references in it. I went and read all 8 references, and that had 20, you know, each of them had 20. So then I read all of those, and you get all the way back to 1976. And in the introduction to the paper on RSA, the last sentence is, this has obvious implications for digital money. This was in 1976.
Wow.
And it's like, and then I'm like, why did it take 50 years to get to Bitcoin?
That's great advice.
Yeah, but read it, absolutely, and write it, right.
And not just writing for your kids and your grandkids. Maybe, I was thinking, maybe write to yourself, right? Because sometimes 10, 20 years go by and things get out of hand, and we forget why we started. So never forget why you started as well. All right, we're almost at an hour. I want to transition into my quote unquote rapid fire mode. So I've got 3 final questions for you. So cool. So the first one is and by the way, actually, this is funny because I think you may have just answered this, but maybe there's more. What advice do you have for newcomers to the ecosystem?
Read. Absolutely. Just go into the dark place and read for a long time.
I like that. I like this idea of a think week. So Bill Gates popularized this idea, and I think it's such an important thing to do. Like, take a week, per year, per quarter, whatever, and kind of just shut off the internet. I feel like your son's done this a few times, right? And kind of just go out in the world and like,
oh my God, beyond anybody else, he went to a barn. He lived in a barn for a week.
So maybe don't disappear for months and months, but cool. I think I'm going to try to do one of those sometime this year.
Well, that's what you did.
I did a meditation retreat, which was also very helpful and very useful.
That was so cool because you came back as a completely fresh human being.
It's one of my.
You were like at your peak right there, man.
Maybe we should share this story because folks don't know what we're referring to. So I did my first 10-day Vipassana silent meditation retreat, and it was just outside Philadelphia, funnily enough. Yeah. And I'd been trying for quite some time to go down and meet with you, Jay, and with the Philadelphia Ethereum Meetup community and kind of, co-host an event. And it just so happened that I was going to be passing through Philadelphia after this event, and the timing worked out. So I literally came straight out of this thing, not having spoken a word for 10 days to any human, not having been online.
So you had a lot to say.
It was a lot of fun.
That was great. I tell people that was the best day in Philadelphia's crypto history.
I was going to say we'll have to do it again, but maybe we can have a little bit more of a buffer.
Repeat that.
It was fun, but it was a bit of a shock. Okay. Question number 2, what is the one message, handing you the microphone, this is your moment, right? What's the one message that you want to share with the Ethereum community?
Decentralize, 100%. It's so important. Don't compromise on decentralization because I always say it's so much easier to centralize than it is to decentralize.
Yep.
So when you hear somebody say, we're going to decentralize later, you should hear, I'm never going to decentralize because that's the truth.
I agree with that.
There's no reason why somebody that has captured an audience will relinquish that audience willingly, especially if they're making money off of it. Totally. So be very careful about who you believe as far as when they say they're going to decentralize something.
I think that's excellent advice. There's definitely an asymmetry there. All right, final question is, what other folks or teams or projects do you think that we should interview and speak to as part of this series? Do you want to give a shout out to anyone?
I wish you would have said that before.
Putting you on the spot.
I love the, well, okay, I'll say my friend Ed Mazarek in Philadelphia, he started a meetup for radical markets in Philadelphia. So this whole radical markets idea is really, really interesting to me. I don't know if it actually is ever really going to be practical or work in any way, but the sense of revisiting what we think of as the right way to behave as a world or as a worldwide community is really, really interesting. And what's so cool about radical markets is it's based on whose work? What's the name of the, there was a guy, you're muted.
Sorry, it's Glenn Weil and Eric Posner. They co-authored the book Radical Markets.
But they use economists from the
Henry George.
Yeah, exactly. So we had our meetup, and then we literally came out of the room and we walked down the street, and there's a sign, a historical marker where Henry George used to live in Philadelphia. So we're going to claim radical, Philadelphia as the home of radical markets.
I love it. Yeah, that's a fascinating community. We'll include some links in the show notes here for folks who haven't had a chance to engage yet with the community is called Radical Exchange. Yeah. There was a conference in Detroit earlier this year, which Ed and I both attended, and that was really awesome. Vitalik from the Ethereum community was there as well. Actually, a bunch of blockchain folks were there.
I'll throw another thing out. So at DEF CON 5, there was a guy that spoke. His name is Stuart Brand.
Yep.
He did the Whole Earth catalog. Go read the Whole Earth catalog, because this was written in like the 70s, and it's deeply about open source, open kind of stuff.
Totally.
It's really amazing. So
yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone embodies that techno-utopianism, pan-technical, whatever, ethos better than Stuart Brand. Funnily enough, I was in San Francisco a few days ago. I was at the Interval, which is the cafe that's run by the Long Now Foundation, which is his current project. So really cool stuff. He's still, he's in his 80s and still doing amazing stuff.
This 11-year-old boy that I started with, that 11-year-old boy had the Whole Earth catalog because my brother brought it. My brother brought it home. I studied that thing like you have no idea.
I saw a copy of it for the first time a few
And
days ago.
I
It's
went
really
up to
cool.
Stuart Brand at DEF CON and I say, my 11-year-old self just loves you.
I was thinking maybe we need a whole blockchain catalog or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can't recreate these things, but you know what I mean. Something
But that
similarly
guy,
grassroots.
you know what's so cool about him? He said he was a hacker of societies.
Yep.
Like he wanted to like hack society, you know.
I like
So
that. That goes back to what I was saying about Ethereum being an operating system for building better
yeah,
human
no,
institutions.
absolutely.
It's a better way. It's a much better framing of that.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
TJ, thank you. This has been such a fun conversation. Thanks so
It's
much for
so
making
fun
time
to
to chat.
talk to you. I can't tell you.
Cool. And I'm sure everyone else will enjoy listening as well.
I hope so.
Thanks for sharing your story and thanks for sharing your insights.
I hope they enjoy it.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed speaking to Jay about his work. Tune in again in a few days for another conversation with the one and only lyrical polymath, Beltran Barracal. Beltran is a designer by trade. He also has decades of experience doing different types of designs. We talk about the importance and role of design and art as well, both specifically in Web3 and in the context of Ethereum, as well as a much bigger picture in the context of society at large. We talk about his work specifically on projects like the Web3 design principles. So tune in and don't miss that episode next week. As always, this show is totally volunteer produced and self-funded, so if you're interested in contributing time or funds to the project, there's information here in the show notes on how to do that. Thank you, and I'll see you back here in a few days.